Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm Adam Block, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and this is a meeting of the Council of Economic Advisors for Thursday, April 13th, 2023. First thing I will do is mention that this meeting is being recorded, consistent with our traditional practice, and in particular is being held remotely, consistent with state with state law. Anything that you say or state will be a matter of public record. The agenda and all other materials for this meeting have been posted on the town's website at needhamma.gov. I'd like to take a roll call for the minutes. When I say your name, please say that you are present. Tina.
Here.
Lise.
Here.
Heidi.
Here.
Dan.
Present.
Liz.
Here.
Jeremy.
Present.
Adam.
Present.
Rick.
Present.
We saw that I had an email from, I think we all did, had an email momentarily ago from Matt Telkoff saying that he was just, I think, in the process of landing a plane. I don't think that was a pun, but we'll know that he'll be present shortly, I believe. Mike Wilcox.
Here.
Bill Day.
Here.
Bob Henschel.
Here.
And with us from town staff is Amy Hilson, our Economic Development Manager.
Good morning.
Amy, do we know if Lee Newman from our planning department will be present?
She will not be present this morning. And I
Okay.
also wanted to add that Stu Agler, who served on the CEA
Yes.
for many, many years, has stepped down. So we thank him for his service, but I wanted to let everybody know that he is no longer on the CEA.
Thank you very much, Amy. And how many vacancies do we have?
We presently have two, and the
Okay.
town manager's office will be posting the vacancies soon and starting the process to advertise and interview for those vacancies.
There's
Would
actually
it
Go
be
ahead,
an idea to bring this to the select board and the planning board? That there are two spots open and there are, as per the original charter, there are no people from those two areas sitting
Hi-
on the CEA?
Heidi is.
Oh,
for
I'm
the
sorry,
select
Heidi.
board, and I am
I
for
apologize.
and I am for the planning board.
Yeah.
There is a business owner in town who spoke to me and has expressed some interest. And I will, Amy, I'll chat with you offline. And I'll pass along any information about the application process for him to reach out probably to Miles as well, but it'll be good for him to probably have a conversation with you. And if any of you also know of any large business owners or small business owners, please feel free to pass along your suggestions to Amy and or myself, or both of us. So with that, we had our minutes from our February 8th meeting. Does anyone have any comments or questions on those minutes? Hearing none, I'll come to the vote in the order that I see you all on the Brady Bunch screen. Can I have a motion to approve the February 8 minutes?
So moved.
We have a motion by Rick. Do I have a second?
Second.
I heard a second and I saw a hand up, but I don't think they were from the same person. So I think,
Or,
all right, I think Heidi got that one first.
all right, Heidi wins.
The voice, but we'll come back. We'll come back to the competition game. So seconded by Heidi. Heidi Frail. Bob Henschel.
Aye.
We'll note that Heidi shook her head as a
Yes,
yes.
aye.
Very good. Thank you. Rick,
Aye.
Lise,
Yes.
Bill Day.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Tina,
Yes.
Jeremy,
Aye.
Adam,
Aye.
Mike Wilcox,
Yes.
Dan Goodman,
Aye.
and Liz Hay.
Yes.
The chair votes aye. The motion carries. Thank you all. So now we're in for a bit of a treat from our select board and the housing plan working group is Heidi Frail, also our member on the select board member on the CEA. Heidi is going to chat to us a summary of the housing plan, an overview of the housing plan that the housing plan working group participated in a process that lasted, I think, about a year or so, but I pass the conch to you, Heidi.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. And Adam, congratulations on your re-election.
Thank you.
So Amy has graciously offered to run some slides for me because I can't. And so we'll just go through really quickly an overview of the DHCD regulations for
Okay.
the MBTA Communities Act, which was passed in 2020. Great, thank you. So I just want to, I've just closed my notes, just a moment. So I just want to make sure everyone understands. First of all, DHCD stands for Department of Housing and Community Development, and this law was passed in order to help start solving the housing crisis that Massachusetts and pretty much everywhere is experiencing now, to increase the diversity of housing and increase specifically transit-based housing. So if you can go to the next slide. I want to remind you all that the DHCD regulations are zoning based. There are no housing production requirements. So that's an important distinction. What we're doing is sort of clearing the way for the market to work to produce more housing, but it is not town-sponsored housing that we're talking about here. So there are some basic requirements that go along with this act
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Excuse me. Some basic requirements are that the zoning needs to be done in communities of reasonable size. What that means is that you can't concentrate all of this new housing that's required in like one, giant high-rise location. It has to be throughout the community to match the path of the commuter rail stations in Needham. And I think the idea is to not segregate that housing. There need to be no restrictions for age or family size. There needs to be a certain density requirement, so 15 units per acre. And all of this housing, or the vast majority of the housing, needs to be located within half a mile from a transit station. So in Needham, we have 4 transit stations. And so I'll show you a map later that sort of lays out where this area is. Next slide, please. And importantly, all of this multifamily housing needs to be allowed as of right by the local zoning. So this does mean changing a lot of our zoning to allow for multifamily housing in various areas where it's not currently permitted. You could have a site plan review to go over some of the details, but it can't be something that would prohibit the housing. It can be something like changing, the way the sidewalk works or the parking works, something like that. Next slide. And as we said, it needs to be suitable for families. Next slide. And again, we talked about density here at, I think it was our last meeting, with regard to a potential development. And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that The DHCD guidelines talk about 15 units per acre density. Our Needham's Apartment 1 zoning mechanism allows for 18 units per acre. And we've sort of designated, or when I say we, I'm talking about the zoning working group from the housing plan working group, which put together some proposed zoning changes. These are not final, these are not anything but proposed right now, but they'll be what I'll discuss when we get to the map. So it is slightly higher than what's required, but it's a zoning mechanism that we've used in other places in town. It seems to work great. So next slide. Again, this just is discussing the need to have a reasonable size. I think the idea here is to allow these multifamily units to blend with a neighborhood. Again, so not to move all of this new housing into, giant complexes, but to spread it in a more natural way through the town. So the way that they have laid this out is that commuter rail communities, you can see on the slide, need to increase the housing stock by 15%. Needham currently has 11,891 housing units. That means that we have our 15% number is 1,784 units. That's the number of units that we need to allow via zoning. So this is not, again, housing production. This is what we need to allow by right with our zoning. Next slide. So again, in trying to make this more of a neighborhoody layout, we need to have a certain number of acres over which we can spread this housing. In Needham, the minimum land requirement is 50 acres, but in order to accommodate all of those units, it will probably be a larger area. Next slide. And all of this area has to be, well, the vast majority of it needs to be within half a mile of a transit station. Bob?
Does existing housing within a half mile of commuter rail stations already count towards that 1,700 units?
It actually, so it's you're not counting the structures, you're counting the allowable structures by zoning. So for example, if you had if you had an area that was currently zoned for single family residence that was going to be rezoned to allow 18 units per acre in the apartment 1 zone, you could count that as 18, even if the single family residence exists and stays there, because you're talking about what's allowable by zoning. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure. Next slide. And DHCD has asked that we not apply too many limits to these new zoning areas. So for example, originally they had said there can be no affordability limits. A lot of communities actually pushed back on that. And so they allow now that we can put some affordability limits on the new zoning. So inclusionary zoning in Needham has typically been 12.5%, although that does not apply all across town. The question is just, we need to sort of prove that development can be done, that this won't prohibit new development, this affordability restriction. So we do have the ability to apply an affordability restriction. And of course, affordability in this context means 80% of AMI, some portion of the housing that was, so if you're creating a development, you would have some portion of those rentals or condos that would be affordable. Next slide. So, and this is, this talks about to your point, these districts may already be built. There might be something there. These don't have to be immediately developable. What they need to have is underlying zoning. So for example, I'll get to you in just one sec, Jeremy. So for example, if we are zoning a church, one of the choices that the zoning group made was to rezone the underlying zoning for some of our churches, because we know that one or two of them are even coming up for sale, or we suspect. And so there is something there right now, and if that doesn't happen, if those churches don't come up for sale, then they remain a church, no harm, no foul. But if something changes and those are then available, then the new zoning would apply. Jeremy?
Can you go back a slide and just, do you know the answer for what our AMI is?
No, I don't. It changes. I don't know what it is right now.
Sure, I just don't have a lot of context for if that's, you know, if they're talking about
It's
$100,000 a year or something else.
Probably more, I
yeah,
think.
I think it is just about $100,000 a year.
Okay.
But I don't have a current figure. So one of the things that I wanted to mention here was that if you see, one of the bullet points says the zoning district can allow for mixed use development, but cannot require it. So one of the things that one of the recommendations that the zoning working group made was that we exempt the center business district from the DHCD regulations zoning changes. And that's because multifamily, solely multifamily units need to be available by right in the locations included in this new zoning outlay. And we felt that the center business district's vitality might be harmed by having solely multifamily units in place in the center business district. We thought, you know, it's one thing to have residential over retail, first floor retail, and then residential above, but to have solely multifamily with no retail on the first floor didn't really vibe with what we wanted for the center business district. So we exempted that area from this requirement. You have to allow solely multifamily by right in order to include that area in your zoning map. So just to let you know. Next slide.
Question.
Yeah.
The last point that you made.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's rules and regulations, and then there's economic viability. I don't know of anyone in the business district that would put apartments on the first floor. It just
Right.
wouldn't-
It's
it
unlikely.
wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree. It's unlikely, but it is allowed. And so we just decided that since we could accomplish all of the other numbers and figures and make everything work without it, that we didn't want to take the chance that because it's allowed, someone would do it. We really felt like the center business district needed businesses on the first floor.
Mhm.
And if I understand correctly from the previous slide, Heidi, we can allow multifamily, we can allow mixed use in that district by right and still be compliant.
No,
Well, the other slide above said that you can make it available. You can make mixed use available.
this is what it says. You can make misuse available, but you cannot require it. So you can make it, to Rich's point, you can make it so that in the center business district, you could use mixed use, but we can't require it. So someone could put just a multifamily, you know, top to bottom.
Right, but the zoning can say that in, you know, in this district, mixed use is allowed by right in a.
Oh, yeah,
in a
yeah, yeah.
minimum.
It's not taking away any rights from the center business district, which
I know
is why
there's
we
not-
didn't put it in.
Right.
Are we doing anything to encourage mixed use development?
We
in the district?
do already have an overlay district, Dan, that does enable currently mixed use. And in fact, there was a project at 50 Dedham, I think, which is the only project that utilized that new zoning. So it is possible, but this would be a this would be in a different effort.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on. So again, we're really only talking about zoning here, not production. So compliance is based on having made the zoning changes. And since the regulations became finalized, I'm sure you've heard that the Attorney General's office has advised that this is really not optional, that they will be pursuing communities who don't comply, in addition to the potential for additional monies if you comply, and the withdrawal of monies if you don't. And the next slide shows us some of the monies that are available and that Needham has taken advantage of. And then moving on to the timeline, the idea here, well, first of all, there's a working group being assembled to work on the zoning changes and to start education for town meeting and town residents, as this does need to go through town meeting, and that's anticipated to take place in May of 2024. And prior to that, the zoning changes need to be approved by DHCD to make sure that we would be in compliance. So that we'll get them approved by DHCD, take them to town meeting, and then implement them.
So and if I understand correctly, the town has submitted its housing plan already to DHCD, and it's been approved by for interim compliance.
Yes, it's a requirement to have a housing plan. So now we do. And our intention to comply has been submitted. And so now we move forward with, the nitty-gritty.
And it's been approved for interim compliance in particular,
Yes.
which is the first of the two steps.
Yes.
Just to answer Jeremy, I think the actual area median income for Needham is close to 180,000. And then it's interesting that it talks about this, I think, and I don't think I saw this detail before, Heidi, that we're allowing a site plan review process in Needham. Any construction that's greater than 10,000 square feet is a major project site plan review special permit. So that is a special permit process. And I think what you're talking about is the use for multifamily has to be allowed by right, but the process would still continue. I can't imagine that we wouldn't.
I'm afraid I can't answer that with certainty.
Okay, we should flag that and chat with town council about that, because that comes up. That comes up in a couple of different areas already in our zoning bylaw for other uses that may be protected. Rick?
With these zoning considerations, is there an opportunity at all to change the zoning requirement of 18 units per acre? So that I mean, it's pretty restrictive from a height standpoint, and I've got to imagine that that's the reason for the zoning the way it is. But I mean, if you're looking at satisfying a requirement of 1,700 plus units, there's only 2 sites in town that I know of, because we're land restricted, that could have any kind of a major effect on that requirement. And that would be the Muzzy site, and that would be the golf course.
No, so the zoning changes that the working group put together include changes to height.
Mhm.
So that, for example, speaking broadly, most of the area of the spine, so that's all of Chestnut Street and the Center Business District and up through Highland, would be allowed a greater height. So certainly in the Heights and in the Center Business District and along the area between, the height of the buildings could be 4 stories with a recessed fourth.
Right.
Okay, so it does allow for a great deal more.
I'm not sure I would call that a great deal, a recessed fourth
Yeah,
floor.
that's already allowed. That's all. 4 stories is allowed in a number of those areas, I think, or certainly a third is.
Right.
And a recessed fourth floor doesn't do anything but hide HVAC equipment, basically. It doesn't provide what you would need for housing.
But well, it does though. And I'm not a zoning expert. I was very fortunate to be on this working group with 2 zoning experts, however, and the calculations that we made is that with the zoning changes that were accomplished and the height changes that were accomplished, we can actually fit. I mean, you have to prove that you can accommodate all 1,784 units, and we can.
So that again begs the question. The only 2 sites I can think of are Muzzy site and
Well,
the golf course. Where are these
let's have-
1,700 units going?
Let's have Amy open up the map, if you don't mind, Amy.
Just give me 1 second to pull it up.
And then I
Now,
see.
obviously, there are some barriers to overcome here. I mean, a lot of these, Adam and I have talked about this, a lot of these areas have separate owners, and we need to facilitate some kind of renovation ideas. But if you look at the map, here are, let's see, let me have you go to the next slide.
So, and just so we're clear, I think what that other slide was taking the spine and it was rezoning certain areas within each of these districts with an overlay. So it's not like where we have this half-mile radius, right, Heidi? You're not rezoning all the way on the radius. You're only rezoning certain color
Certain
shaded.
portions, right? And remember too, that this is, I mean, we're talking about townhomes. We're talking about maybe if you think about some row houses like Brookline style or Back Bay style row houses, along the spine here, talking about 2 and 3 family houses, or little bungalow clusters like the one over on West. What we're talking about is not, one gigantic spot where we're putting 1,000 units. We're talking about spreading this in a way that facilitates neighborhoods through this area.
Bob, you had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I just, broadly speaking, I second what Rick said. I think the secret sauce to all of this is height, and that always seems to be the biggest stumbling block whenever we try to present something a little innovative or forward thinking. We always seem to get a lot of resistance there. So I think that is something, whatever the ultimate number is, I don't know, but it's something that I think we need to take a closer look at. The other 2 points I wanted to make is, this is an example where we kind of get in our own way as a town a lot of times, is there's setbacks between commercial districts and residential districts, and the train lines basically form a border between commercial and residential districts. Adam, I don't know where we've landed on this, but I mean, I know in the past that those setbacks were so onerous as to almost stifle any development. I think we flexed on that a little bit in the past, but I'm not sure. But in addition to that, I think there's some pretty Byzantine rules about developing within proximity to T tracks. I think the T can weigh in and say yay or nay in a lot of cases. So I'm just curious if at the state level, the T is on board with this, if they're aware of what's going on and are going to be a partner in all of this.
I think that with the this is designed with the MBTA to ensure multifamily development along the transportation, which for us is also a commercial spine of the town. But you certainly raise important points. I'm making a note, but Heidi, we definitely need to flag this because
Yeah.
Rick and Bob are speaking about height as a limitation that precludes actual development. That's a real world challenge we should reconsider. And also there's a 50-foot setback between residential and commercial districts. And we're going to have to modify that, which may not have otherwise been thought of, to actually, it's one thing for compliance.
Yeah.
It's another thing to actually, which I think, Rick, you were talking about. It's one thing to be compliant for a state program, but it's another thing to actually desire to achieve those goals and to
Exactly.
floor area ratio or the number per unit is very restrictive, and it doesn't make may not be economically viable. So in other words, if you've got a half an acre section and you're only allowing 9 units, that may not be enough to turn that over. So if it was 36 units an acre, would that work? Or some, but I think we do need to consider a number of these dimensional regulations that will actually yield an incentive to achieve the goal. Otherwise, it's nice on paper.
Yeah.
If I could add to that for a second, and basically support what you were just saying, and this is the way I was thinking about it. There's the theoretical. Yeah, I could show you how we can get 1,700 units theoretically, but from a practical standpoint, would that ever be done? Probably not. You could put together irregular pieces of thin triangles of pieces of land together to form the acreage that
Yeah.
the regulations say that you need, for example. And so theoretically you meet the requirement, but practically it'll never get done. And it's the practical side of this whole equation that we need to really benefit the town.
Right. And I think to that point, like one of the things that we did try to do in addition to the guidelines to complying with the guidelines was to regularize some of these very strange zoning loopholes almost that had survived from previous iterations, which I think actually makes a lot of this work a lot better. Lise,
So I just have 2 questions from a clarifying purpose, because I do get a lot of questions about this. So one, I thought from those slides, you can't group them all together like at the golf course or the Muzzy site, like they don't want you to put them all in one place. And then secondly, regarding the Muzzy site, do buses count as mass transit because they're not really close enough to walk to one of the MBTA commuter rail stations? So,
I think they're close enough.
for Needham, they don't count.
okay, that
But
was my
isn't Needham Heights station close enough to Muzzy, within a half mile?
Well, right. So the commuter rail station counts. I'm just saying that the bus route does not count.
bus routes don't count, but so I wasn't sure the distance between that Needham Heights and Muzzy. So that is within a half mile. I just wasn't sure of the measurement.
Well, not according to this map, it's just outside.
Yeah,
of the
it's just
half
out of reach. And there is a sort of a conditional, like, as you know, it can be a little further than a half mile if certain conditions are met. It's easy to get to, and there's some kind of, walking or biking route, etc. This again was just meant to be like an overview.
Yep.
So I don't have all of the fine detail, but
buses do not count. That's good to
buses
know.
do
Right.
not count.
Okay.
Which is
So-
funny because when this program originally came
Yeah.
out, Needham was designated as a bus community
Yeah,
and
we
not
were
a train
misclassified.
community.
Which is kind of ridiculous. So if you see on this map, you can obviously see the T stations marked out, the commuter rail stations. I don't have the Hersey station on this map, which it has a much smaller mini commercial area around it, which is included in the zoning changes, but is not super significant. This is the main area. And you can see that there's a good deal of overlap. Again, I don't have handy all of the details, the zoning details on the changes made to height restrictions. I do hear your points about that, though. All I can say is that all of this will be coming up for review. So nothing's a done deal. These are proposals only, and certainly having them be, commercially viable is really important, because it makes no difference if we comply zoning wise, but then can't put any of this into production.
Heidi, I wonder if it might make sense to that exact point, that maybe someone from the CEA or Amy or someone, flags from the CEA, because this group does have the expertise and understanding the difference between zoning and on a theoretical basis and zoning on a practical basis.
Yeah, well, so the working group that I mentioned is being put together. It will obviously include select board and planning board, but I think also will include people with development expertise.
Who created the map we're viewing now?
I'm sorry?
Who created the map that we are viewing?
The zoning working group of the housing working group
For the town?
for the town.
Yep.
So G. McKnight, Oscar Mertz, and myself.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Heidi or any other comments on the housing plan? I don't see any other hands up, so I do hope that we will be able to see mixed use come from this, particularly because it is along the commercial spine, and I think that it would turn over our retail, and I think can add to the retail vibrancy, and different ages and different areas will change the demand for products and services. So I think that's and that's already a goal in a number of the districts anyways. So that's great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We'll look forward to additional updates. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about the background for the parking study? Amy sent around a parking study that was conducted by Stantec, an engineering firm. They studied 2 districts, right? I think the center and the Heights.
That's correct.
Right.
So the select board requested that a parking study be done to focus on both the Needham Heights Business District and the Needham Center Business District. And the intent was to, of course, get a better idea of sort of the usage. This is also going to impact any decisions that are going to be made as the select board sort of hits the reset button on the phase 2 of the downtown streetscape project. So having a better idea of what the parking usage is and the trends, and any recommendations that the consultant would make would be taken into consideration as plans are revisited for phase 2 of the streetscape project. So the timing of this was expedited to a degree because the plans can't move forward, of course, until we had this data. So we set off with Stantec. After a very lengthy sort of RFP process, Stantec was chosen, and they began their work last November doing parking counts. They did a presentation to the select board. I sent you all a link to it. It was about an hour long, and I'm trying to streamline this. If you want to get into the weeds on the details, I encourage you to watch that presentation. Jason Schreiber, who is the principal at Stantec, who led the charge on this parking study, is incredibly knowledgeable. He's been doing this for 20 something years. I've worked with him in another community, and he's really knows his stuff. So I can walk through sort of is a very sort of top level overview of the study, and then we'll get into the recommendations. What the select board is looking for is for the CEA to help prioritize the recommendations. There are actually 13 that came out of this study. So in order to help focus on the ones that sort of are the most pressing or the most important, again, the CEA is looking, I'm sorry, the select board is looking for the CEA's guidance on that. So I'm not looking for any decisions to be made today, but this is to start the conversation. And then hopefully in the meantime, you have a chance to not only watch the select board presentation. Yes. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Just to give a little context, when did this the select board want our comments by?
So looking to get comments by, in early May. So hopefully at the next CEA meeting, we can come back with recommendations. So this is, again, to get the conversation started and to answer any questions that you might have. So this is a very sort of data dense study. So if you have specific questions, I will try to answer them. But again, I'm trying to keep this as top level as possible. So let me just share my screen. Okay. All right. All right, so we kicked the project off, as I mentioned, in November. We had a variety of public engagement. After they did the data counts, they wanted to do it in November prior to the holiday season to get a better idea of usage. We had a public survey. We got well over 1,000 respondents. People could take the survey twice. We'll get into that, but there wasn't as much, a huge amount of people that took it twice, but you could take it for both Needham Heights and Needham Center. So we had a public workshop in January, February. They came back with the draft recommendations, and then they did the presentation to the select board in March. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of the goals. So we wanted to document the existing parking supply, improving parking management system, investigate efficiency, user friendliness, identify and recommend parking supply efficiency opportunities to see if there's a possibility to unlock parking areas, higher demand, better aligned policies with long-term goals and growth of the two areas, support the economy of both the center and the heights, and then inform decision-making for future street improvement projects. Okay, so again, you guys can all study this on your own time, but these are the parking counts that they did, and it gets really into the weeds here. Peak occupancy.
Can you go back a
Yep.
couple slides?
Sorry, which one?
That one
Yeah.
right there.
Yes.
Going through this report, this is a 77-page report, which is, you're right, it's pretty detailed. I was surprised by a couple of things. I was surprised that the peak occupancy of downtown was at 6 p.m.
Mhm.
That surprised me. And that there were only 16 spaces still available. I mean, I think that says a lot right there. 16 spaces is not enough, especially if they're scattered.
Well, that's
That's
on
basic.
street. That's on street.
Right.
That's not the public lots or private lots.
Right, and they make the recommendation later. It really speaks to the idea of having the proper signage to
Yes.
be able to direct people to where you need to go, which we've been saying for years. It really, I mean, highlights that need right there.
Absolutely. So if you're from Needham, of course, you know where to park. If you're from out of town, you're going to try to find the spot that is closest to your destination. So you're going to look first for on-street parking spaces. And so, as you mentioned, if there's not adequate signage to point you in the right direction where you can find additional parking vacancies, then you don't know where to go.
Right.
Okay. All right. So this is just going through the occupancy, also public parking again. Please review all of this. That we did the public survey, said, we had 1,049 responses. There included visitors, residents, business owners, employees, commuter rail riders, and hospital workers. And the largest group of respondents was between the ages of 45 and 64. So the key takeaways, there was actually a little bit of a difference between Needham Center and Needham Heights, but for the most part, in Needham Center, one of the biggest things that people were communicating that they wanted was improved meters and technology. I'm sure Liz can chime in and say how many customers or clients of hers have come in and in a panic and looking for quarters. So they're a little bit antiquated. And so folks are looking for a modernization of the parking technology. And that also what's happening is employees are also scrambling for parking spaces. This is sort of a bigger conversation, but we have permit parking for businesses in both Needham Center and Needham Heights, but we have a lot of businesses who have multiple part-time employees, and the number of permits that they are given is not adequate for the number of employees that they have, or allowing for sharing between the employees as well. Okay. 91% of the visitors to Needham Center spend less than 2 hours, and 46% of customers park 1 or 2 blocks away. So in Needham Heights, the key takeaways were more parking is desired as a priority. 25% of employees park on street, which is not what we want. We want those on-street parking spaces to be left for customers. And 95% spend less than 2 hours. And 74% of customers park right out front or on the same block. Okay. So both areas, folks are looking to be able to pay with an app. There are openness to some parking being used for other purposes or amenities. Proximity to parking is the first influencer in choosing a space, which of course everybody knows, everybody wants to park closer. And then a general desire to see improved information and signage about parking options. Okay, so we had an open house town hall. We had about 50 visitors, but the folks that did come were very engaged. There was a lot of really great feedback and some really good conversations.
Amy, where do they park?
That's a good question. That was not required for entrance to this event. Okay, so stakeholder conversations. Let's see. We had 2 different focus groups, one with Needham Center businesses, which Liz participated in, and we also had one with Needham Heights businesses as well. And having those, concentrated conversations with the business owners was super helpful. We learned a lot about, the challenges that they continue to face. They're the folks sort of on the front lines, and they can tell us, what they're seeing and what they're hearing from their customers as well. All right, so the summary analysis, again, this gets into the weeds. So the long and the short of it is I know we've had conversations before where we have talked about, would it be great to put a parking deck in the Chapel Street lot? Jason Schreiber from Stantec basically came out and said, that would be not a good use of resources to do that because you have adequate supply. It's just not being managed properly. So when we get to the recommendations, we'll show you how they suggest that we better manage our parking supply. So hard to argue with an expert on parking, but I know that this is a conversation we've had a lot of times, but
Amy,
yes.
we also talked about stacked parking on the lot in front of Walgreens, I think.
Oh, looks like I'm frozen.
Can you hear me? Hello?
All right. All right. I'm going to, for whatever reason, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
All right. Sorry. I'm just going to keep my video off for a moment because it looks like I was frozen. All right. So parking supply. Right,
sorry, can you go back for 1 second to that slide? What's the green and what's the gray? Just so I'm sure I know what I'm looking at.
what is the green and what is the gray? Those are, so the gray is what is available and the green is what is being used.
So this is a capacity slide, and ultimately the point of this slide shows that we have more supply. We have overcapacity of parking. We have more supply than we have demand for. Even though, Rick, to your point, there was only 16 parking spaces. Those were just 16 on-street parking spaces at 6. There is still capacity, I think, elsewhere.
Right, but people don't know where they are.
So,
That's
right,
the-
and just as a reminder, the CEA, we did talk about this, Rick. This is something that you brought up after we did a walking tour and spoke to a number of businesses years ago. We did make the recommendation to the select board for parking signage.
Right.
And they enacted it, they took action on it. But as Stantec points out, as we've commented on before, the size, the place, and the color, and the number of them, I don't, haven't achieved the goal. So we need to change the signage for sure. And they call that out as a recommendation.
Are the spaces listed here, are these unrestricted other than as to like a 2-hour max?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I'm having some technical issues and I don't know why my video is not working. So apologies.
Meaning, there's, when we say there's public parking, by way of example, the lot across the street in the Needham Bank lot, half of it is for Needham Bank customers only. So is this unrestricted public parking other than, a 2-hour meter time limit, or is this all parking spaces restricted or not?
This is all parking spaces restricted or not.
So that's actually not then a very good answer to whether there is parking if some of the available supply is parking for which the human looking for a space can't use, right?
That's true, but one of the recommendations that Stantec did make is to forge relationships with the owners of the private parking spaces to see if they can be utilized for public parking after hours.
Do we have a breakdown of the difference between unrestricted and restricted?
Yes, it is in here in one of the slides.
Yep.
It's-
Amy, the report I know says that regarding the restricted is to develop some sort of incentive for the owners of those restricted spaces to accommodate this request. But I don't think they suggested what that would be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So one of the things that they offered, for example, the Walgreens lot is currently a privately owned lot, but it's used as if it's a public lot. So one of the suggestions that they made would be that if the town entered some kind of agreement with Walgreens so that the town would maintain sort of the care of the lot itself, sort of repave it, restripe it, and allow Walgreens to obviously continue to use it for their customers, but allow it for use for the public as well, so that there would be some kind of agreement between the two parties.
That lot in particular is also used by the medical building.
The back of it. Oh, yes,
yeah.
a portion of it is, yes.
Yeah.
Rockland Trust, that side of the building
Yes.
as well. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I can tell you as a downtown landlord, most people don't respect private property anyway, and parking abuse is pretty common. So I think de facto it's kind of working that way already, much to my annoyance.
okay.
I think it's hard to answer the question of that there's excess supply, right? Like that's like counting spaces in my driveway and then saying, well, we don't need more public parking. Like I think there has to be a more granular look at that.
I think what they're suggesting is before adding resources to increasing the public parking supplies, that we explore possibilities for partnering with owners of private lots to see how they can be utilized for public use.
In particular, I think there are a lot of employees of the various businesses taking up street spots because there aren't these background relationships so that they have designated parking spots that otherwise the public might not, like you're saying, be able to use. If we can manage those spaces a little bit better, I think more of them would be available for the public to use.
No, I get that. What we're saying is there's an insufficient supply and we have two ways we can solve that. We can build more public facilities, or we can effectively rent or incentivize what are otherwise restricted private facilities. I'm fine with engaging in that analysis. That seems smart to me. If it's much cheaper to incentivize people to unlock their private use, but I don't think we can start from there is adequate supply as part of the conversation. There just isn't adequate supply. I think anybody who's tried to park at the James on a Friday night is well aware.
Well, to that point, for example, Amy, I think you're saying that the Needham Bank lot is available or is included with all these parking spaces, right?
That's correct.
Right. So, and that's easy access to the James, but that even though I know it's there, it wouldn't be the first place I would think of to park if I was going to the James. And I think, again, it's signage. It's letting people know, hey, there's parking over here. If you want to go here, that we just don't have. I mean, I could agree or disagree that there's sufficient parking, but it's just knowing where it is that makes all the difference.
So a little higher end context, Amy, if you don't mind, that this was done as part of a downtown streetscape exercise, but it will inform a number of other things. And one of the things I would ask the CEA is whether it makes sense to study, and I think it probably does, to study the parking needs across our other commercial districts. I do, ultimately what this is showing is that we have an oversupply, and on the planning board, I know that we waive parking, so often. And part of the goal would be to, from the planning board's point of view, would be to reduce the number of parking spaces required, so we don't have to provide special permits for waivers. But we need to still make sure that we have parking supply on the one hand, and that it's managed more efficiently. These are two hot areas, obviously, the downtown and the Heights. But I think this kind of served a different purpose. The CEA is looking at it from a slightly different lens. And all of the comments that Jeremy, Bob, Rick, and others are making are, I think, helpful guidance, ultimately that will provide some kind of more specific recommendations to this select board. Is that fair, Amy?
Yes. Okay, so we'll continue going through this. To Rick's point, the signage is inadequate. The parking pricing, Stantec is basically saying that the static pricing is not doing us any favors right now. It's not helping us to better manage the supply. This is just comparing what other communities are charging right now. Okay, the parking regulations, when we get to the recommendations, they are suggesting that we do away with the 2-hour limit and that instead the parking be managed by actual pricing. And let me just back up and say that if you look at the second point, the enforcement is mostly chasing workers, not legitimate violators. So in many cases, we have employees that are parking in both the center and the Heights that are parking on street and are sort of moving their cars around, playing sort of multiple, playing musical parking spots throughout the day to avoid getting tickets because they either don't have a permit to park in the permit lot or, they certainly just don't want to get a ticket, so that's why they're moving it around all day. Okay. And then you look at the last bullet point too, the restaurant workers are occupying prime on-street spaces before customers arrive. So right now, the meters turn off or no longer effective after 6 p.m. at night. So you have a restaurant worker that may come in and their shift starts, say, at 5 o'clock. They find an on-street parking space, put in enough, money to get them to 6 o'clock, and then their car sits there for multiple hours until their shift ends, where those spots would be prime spots for customers and could turn over multiple times during that employee's shift. Okay, so the permit analysis, again, this needs to be overhauled. Meter technology needs to be improved. Parking enforcement also needs to be improved. I'm going to just jump ahead to the actual the key findings right here. So just reiterating what we just talked about. And then their draft recommendations. So there's 13 of them that go from, performance-based pricing. Again, if performance-based, meaning that if you park closer to sort of the epicenter of sort of like where town hall is, the parking would be more expensive as opposed to sort of on the outskirts. If you park, say, on Pickering Street, it would be less. You need to look at the permit program that we have right now, again, allowing both business owners in Needham Center and Needham Heights to purchase permits for their employees. I'm getting a lot of feedback. We heard in focus groups that this program just is not adequate. For example, one of the restaurants in Needham Center has over 20 employees, and it would be really cost prohibitive for them and difficult to purchase 20 different passes at $200 a piece. That's an expense, and logistically for them, it's just an increased burden. Okay, shared parking district, allowing for shared use between what's privately owned and publicly owned. So shared parking, I gave Walgreens as an example. Long-term parking right now, unless you have a permit, there's nowhere to park for more than 2 hours. So we're basically discouraging people from spending more than 2 hours in both of these business districts, unless it's after hours, after 6 p.m. at night. So if you came at, say, noon and you wanted to grab lunch and then get a service, you went to a local salon and then you want to do some shopping, that's going to take more than 2 hours. And right now we don't have an ability for people to do that. Enforcement has been spotty. There needs to be more consistency with that. But I also want to remind everyone that, these parking sort of regulations and these parking, the parking management sort of policies that we come up with are always with the intent to promote turnover, to create vacancies for people to come to both the center and the Heights to patronize the small businesses. They are not intended for the town to collect a large amount of money. That's never the intent with any kind of parking program. It's not as though the town is looking as a line item in the budget to collect lots of money in revenue, lots of revenue through not only the meters, but through violations. It's really to support the small business community. So create more active curbs. We talked about having some loading zones, some active loading zones, both in the center and the Heights, that would maybe be 10 or 15 minutes of drop off or pickup. So it would allow people to pull in, to go in and grab their takeout. It would allow for Uber Eats drivers to park temporarily, to run in and grab their orders. Or if somebody wanted to pull up in front of a restaurant to drop off their passengers and then go park the car. So they would be active loading zones, and the business owners were very receptive to that idea. And it would also prevent double parking, which happens a lot with for those uses that I just mentioned. Improve parking signage and wayfinding, as we talked about. payment technologies. There's a way to potentially allow for an app to be used to pay for parking without having to replace all of the meters. And I'm exploring the cost to do so and actually talking to other communities. There's a way to actually sort of put a sticker on the existing meters and allow people to pay for parking that way. And then introduce flexibility in zoning. That would be something the planning board would address. And Stantec is going to do a presentation specific to the zoning changes to the planning board, hopefully sometime in the next few weeks. As Adam mentioned, so many applicants are seeking parking waivers. So if that continues to happen, it sort of begs the question, why are the requirements there to begin with if there's repeated requests for waivers in this area? And then parking supply opportunities, again, partnering with private owners, multimodal improvements. We heard from folks who want to see improvements made. If you have a situation in which you create a more walkable and desirable area for people to visit, they are willing to park further away. So some of the feedback that we received through not only the surveys, but the focus groups and the open house was that in some areas, people don't feel safe crossing the street, so that they might actually park their car. They might move from one end of Great Plain Avenue to another if they don't feel safe crossing their street with young kids or somebody who may have a physical disability, that sort of thing. So those will be taken into consideration. Bike parking infrastructure, getting back to that as well. And then, clarity of regulations. It's a little bit confusing for folks, especially with a lot of the signage. We see it all the time and don't realize it, but there's pictures that Stantec shared that, especially if you pull into like the Chapel Street lot, it'll say parking permit only, and then it'll say this time, and then it'll say, 2-hour limit. So it's very confusing for folks trying to make heads or tails of what the parking regulations are. So the slideshow that I did share with you gets into more details on all of these recommendations. So out of these 13, the select board is looking for the CEA's recommendation on sort of the top 3 that we would recommend would be sort of the priority. I know that's a lot to digest, and I went through it very quickly, and I again apologize that my camera is not working. I don't know what's going on this morning, but happy to answer any questions.
Yep. Amy, could you move ahead to where they gave examples of improved parking signage?
Sure. Let's see.
And then Bob had his hand up too as well.
Okay.
But there are other examples as well, if I recall. Yeah,
Nice.
that is a nice sign. I would make it in a brighter color though.
Yes.
So we've talked about a wayfinding signage sort of program for Needham Center, which could go beyond the center. It could be through Needham Heights, or it could be for the town overall. So we need to weigh into whether sort of putting up giant P signs with an arrow, or do we want to be thoughtful about having a more sort of deliberate and comprehensive program that would be wayfinding, that would incorporate sort of the branding of the wayfinding, which would include parking.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I would elevate number 9 on the list of recommendations to the top of the list. That's the zoning changes. I totally agree with what Adam said. We've got a set of rules that don't really reflect the reality on the ground, nor the reality of how people use a downtown, and yet we impose these rules that just are out of step. And over the years, we've talked about the general carping of the permitting process in Needham. And I think that this kind of gets to the core of it. You know, these rules that don't make sense and that really aren't applied anyway. You know, it'd be the equivalent of saying you've got to be 12 feet tall to pull a building permit in town. And then, you know, you got to explain, well, I'm not 12 feet tall. Well, that's okay. You know, you can do it anyway. It's like, well, then don't require it, you know? So I think that's a real easy place to start.
And
Please.
I just have a question about the 3 recommendations that we have. Do we have to choose from the short term, or can we go across whatever length of time is going to be required to implement them?
I think that, you know, the 3 priorities aren't really, it's an interesting question. Time restricted, like I think the wayfindage program, you know, is critical. That's, it's not just an urgent issue, but it's a long term. It's a significant change that would impact the long term, as well as would, like Bob was saying, changing the zoning bylaw for the requirements. It also sounds like better managing the parking that we do have would also improve both for employees and for customers. But I don't think that's necessarily time-based. Amy, do I have that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments? Then what I would say, or what I would ask is, Amy has sent around this parking study, and at our next meeting, we'll have a discussion and then make a recommendation. We'll vote on what our priorities, our top 3 priorities are. Maybe they're all consistent, or maybe we have 12 of them and then we've got to debate them down to whichever we determine to send to the select board as our recommendations. But please take a look at this and the recommendations that they have, and you know, and provide, you can provide Amy any comments, or excuse me, in the meantime, or you know, we'll just meet on this next month and finalize recommendations then too, and we can discuss them then. Rick.
Yeah, is the housing presentation that Heidi presented, is that going to be available to us as well?
I can email that around. I'm not sure if that specific presentation is on the website. I mean, the housing plan itself is, but
Yeah. You can make, I mean, those slides, you can make them available. That's fine.
okay.
They've been updated, so there is some stuff that is available currently on the web, but I've tweaked this to include some updates. So.
Okay. Thank you.
For the record, I'm going to note that Matt Telkoff is present.
I'm not
What's that? What'd you say, Bob? Oh,
just saying hi to Matt.
Hello
Good.
back. Sorry about that.
no problem. So the next item on our agenda is an update from our planning department. Amy, were you able to get an update of any new permits from Lee?
Yes, so there's not a lot in the way to update you all from the last time that we had an update on this in January. 557 Highland Avenue, as everybody knows, has been approved for a special permit. The developer has not yet begun work or finalized things, and hasn't pulled permits for this. So that's status on that. Let's see, 100 West Street, there's which is the former Carter Mill building at Avery Square in Needham Heights. The applicant is still working on adjustments to the plans that will come back to the planning board as well. Children's Hospital over on First Street has begun their construction. It looks as though they will be done sometime in 2025. So that's moving along. see, there's a few new businesses to share. There's actually at 1502 Highland Ave, the former Lisa's Boutique space, which is across from Town Common. There is a personal trainer who is looking to go in there, so they need to go through and get a special permit to allow for that use in the Central Business District. Let's see, former Cervante Cafe on Great Plain Avenue is now a business called Sweet Boba, and they are looking to get approval for 6 interior seats. And the Sierra Naturals, which is medical marijuana, is looking to get approval for no appointment only type of service to their clients. So unless, Adam, you have anything to add from the planning board?
That's helpful, Amy. On the Sierra Naturals, they came to the planning board some time ago, and the planning board wanted to, they approved it, we approved it conditionally, but not permanently, and wanted a 6-month runway to see if there had been any impacts on the neighbors, because there had been a number of neighbors at the planning board public hearing identified a number of impacts, a number of adverse impacts. And so the planning board created a 6-month window to see how things improved or not, to then determine whether to make that the changes permanent, but the non-appointment process permanent or not. So, and that'll come up, it sounds like. I think you've hit the highlights.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that. Do you have an update for us?
Yes, just a few quick things. The Arts and Cultural Action Plan is still moving forward. We kicked that off, as I mentioned to all of you, last October with MAPC. We received a technical assistance grant, which is valued in the vicinity of about $45,000. And so we are in the process of developing sort of a vision for Needham. And right now we're in the process of soliciting input from the community. So we launched a survey last week. I'll send it to all of you. It's actually posted on the town's website, and we sent it out in the newsletter last week, but it would be great if each of you could take it's about a 5 to 10 minute survey to share your thoughts on arts and cultural programming and presence in Needham. So we look to wrap that up in the coming fall, probably October. But in the meantime, we're going to have focus groups of different sort of constituent groups around town in May and June. So more on that to come. The town is also launching a micro-mobility study, sort of last mile transit, and Via Transit is the contract that the company that we have contracted with. They actually currently do the program for Newton, sort of their NUMO last mile transit. So we'll be working with them to sort of explore the feasibility of providing last mile transit resources for folks in Needham as well.
Amy,
And yes,
Amy, what does that mean? Is that getting residents and business employees from the train stations to the Green Line, or is that multimodal transportation along Highland Avenue? Did I miss something?
so sort of all of the above. It's sort of when we talk about micromobility, it's sort of, you know, within a mile or two of your destination. So it would be either from public transportation or could be from point A to point B in within Needham itself. So one of the things that we're looking at, and actually we discussed this, Mike Wilcox was part of this conversation, as was Lise last week at the N Square Innovation District chamber meeting last Friday, was currently there are several businesses located in the New England Business Center that are required through their special permit, the planning board, to contract with the 128 Business Council to provide sort of that last, you know, mile transit from public transportation to their locations. So we'll be looking at whether or not this could either complement or replace that as an option, as I know it's an added expense for these businesses within the office park. So we're going to be exploring this as an opportunity to allow for additional options. Okay. And
Amy,
speak-
just
yes.
one point on that. I
Yes.
was at Wellesley Office Park the other day. You know, they have kind of this mixed use development now with that new residential building open, and they use an Uber shuttle at that location, which is they said has been very successful just in terms of just being on demand and being much more cost effective. So to the extent you would like to have me introduce you to the people who are managing that property to get more information on how they use it, I'd be happy to facilitate a conversation if you think that's beneficial.
Yes, that would be great. I'll follow up with you on that for sure. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
And then speaking of studies, the town is also partnering with the city of Newton to explore the feasibility of reconnecting Newton and Needham on the abandoned trail line that goes basically.
With,
I'm just gonna mute. That basically parallels Highland Avenue. I'll share more information with all of you as you can sort of see the map and all that, but it's basically called Community Way, and there's 2 public meetings that are coming up. One is next Tuesday evening, and it's going to be held at Powers Hall, as well as virtually. And then the following week, the city of Newton is hosting just a totally virtual meeting on the 26th of April. And all of that information can be found on the town's website, but I'll send everybody a link to that. And you can go to either meeting, even if you live in Newton, you can go to the Needham meeting and vice versa. It's an opportunity to learn more about the project and ask questions and share your feedback, but they're exploring having it be a walking path, a biking path, and potentially even sort of electric vehicles through there as well. So that's another opportunity to create more connectivity between the 2 communities, and certainly provide additional opportunities for folks to get to public transportation as well. So those are sort of the major highlights of things that are going on related to economic development, but happy to answer any questions.
A couple of other updates as well. We have a small but mighty site selection kind of marketing group within the CEA, Jeremy, myself, and Liz, and we're going to work towards coming up with some recommendations to chat with the full board on materials and some kind of a marketing program to help with site selection. So we'll want to chat, in particular, for instance, Adam, with any of the work that that you're doing, and I know Liz, you at the chamber have done a number of have pursued a number of programs, and we'll have some resources that you talked about before. And Mike, you probably have some intelligence as well on what it's like to cite businesses in different municipalities, and some information that may be helpful as part of that program. So we're looking forward to getting that to the full CA for comment as well. While I see everyone here, I am curious, are you finding Mike, that more of your tenants are occupying and returning back to pre-pandemic levels? Are they occupying the offices 3 to 4 days a week now or more?
There's a regular population in most of our buildings. There's a few that don't come back at all. The challenge for us has been to sort of keep the amenities that were, basically like the cafe and whatnot, certain buildings, to get them back reopened, because the count just isn't sort of steady enough to sort of bankroll what they need for business there. So I guess it's where it's going to be for a while right now, but it's really not the same as it was before, and we're just trying to sort of get used to the new normal as to how we can operate the buildings and provide services and whatnot.
Is the new normal something like 70% occupancy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and less on Monday and Friday. Even
Yeah, I think you've generally hit it. There are people on Fridays and Mondays, but you know, that's the crux. And I think anybody who gets on the highway or drives around town kind of notices that those 3 days are the ones that seem to have the most traffic associated with it.
And Adam, are you finding that similarly?
That's what it seems like. Yeah, just in my experience also, when I'm adding extra time to my, meetings or commute or whatever on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because that Fridays are just really quiet. And I think now with it going to be 85 degrees today or tomorrow, it's going to be even quieter on Fridays. So
Right. Matt, are you finding that the employees in your business are they back 100% of the time? Are they Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and less frequent Monday, Friday? What are you finding in your business?
Consistent with what was just said. Yeah, it's and even Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's probably 50 to 60%. And then Mondays and Fridays are just very, very sparse. It's usually somebody that does 5 days a week that wants to be in the office for 5 days a week. That's in on Monday and Friday. But I'm in my DC office today, and there's only like about 7 people here out of the 50. Boston typically will do better. Does it make sense? Yeah, Boston's usually 60 or 70%.
I bring this up because the last time I think we spoke about this, I think the number was about 50%. So it seems like more people are coming back to the office more regularly, particularly on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday schedule.
Yeah.
That may be. Dan, is that what you find with your employees at your business?
I would say that we're back more regularly, more frequently. We've got it doesn't hold so true to that. I mean, I feel like there's a bunch of people that we have Mondays that it's like, all right, Monday's the day to come in, and then Fridays definitely are lighter. But I'd say it's 3 to 4 days a week for most people, and it's sort of a toss up whether they don't come in on Mondays or Tuesdays. But then again, we have a saying around Building 36, and we say TGIM. Thank goodness it's Monday. So trying to get people more back in here more frequently. And so we're definitely seeing a trend that there's definitely more people, there's more activity, the whole building. We're just seeing more folks around here, which is great.
Jeremy, what about your law firm? Not a small law firm.
So we're about 160 lawyers in Boston, plus about another 150 support personnel. Most folks are in the office 2 to 3 days a week. I'm probably in the office once a week, if that. But they're recommending that the partners at least come back 2 to 3 days a week, and then the associates are being asked to do the same. We have talked very specifically internally, I think reflective of a lot of businesses, that we need to continue to preserve flexible work schedules if we ever want to hire another human. And so I think that has just become the new normal. And the idea of asking particularly, high value 28-year-olds to go back to 5 days a week in the office is going to be very difficult.
Unless you hire robots.
We try. If I could make them all robots, that would be very good for my bottom line, but sadly.
Understood.
We're exactly our Boston office. We have 900 people. And so when I gave you that number before of 60%, so it's a good number those 3 days, but it's exactly the same thing as what Jeremy said. It's throughout the country. We're just we won't be able to hire people if we require things. We are asking them to commit to something though. Either you're remote, you're in full, or you're hybrid. And if you're hybrid, you should be in 2 to 3 days a week is kind of our philosophy.
Thank you very much for the update. Unless anyone has anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion by Matt to adjourn, a second by Jeremy. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll do the Brady Bunch roll call. This time, Lise.
Do I say goodbye or just?
You say yay or nay, yes or no?
Yay.
There you go.
And goodbye. Okay.
I love the enthusiasm. Thank you. Rick.
Yay.
Bill,
Yay.
Heidi,
Yay.
Jeremy,
Yay, and also just a thank you to Heidi and Amy for the great presentations and the hard work on the committees. Great job.
Agreed. And I just watched Heidi last night. Boy, a lot of hours, and Adam, a lot of hours spent on behalf of the town.
Dan,
Yay.
Michael,
Yay, and thanks, everyone.
Adam,
Yay.
Matt Talkoff.
Yay.
The chair votes aye. We are adjourned. Look out for some more from Amy. Amy, thank you very much. Heidi, thank you very much as well. We'll see you guys in May.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.